Welcome to the special event. My name is Pawan Sinha. I'm a professor of neuroscience at MIT, and I have the privilege of serving as the faculty director for the MIT India program. I want to start by acknowledging something that's, I'm sure, on all of our minds. The situation in India continues to be grim and a source of deep worry for all of us who have friends and family in the country. Things do seem to be very slowly taking a turn for the better, at least in the cities. I hope the progress will continue. We are planning to organize a panel in the coming weeks to gain a more accurate sense of the situation on the ground. We shall send out announcements in due course. On a more positive note, I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's session. We are joined by Shekhar Kapur, a master storyteller in the medium of films and theater. He will be in conversation with Anushka Shah. I want to thank Nureen Das and Christina Davies of the MIT India program for organizing this session. Shekhar has led a rich and unusual life. After leaving his corporate career as a chartered accountant, Shekhar pursued his passion for the arts. He's an award-winning film, television, and theater director, producer, and digital entrepreneur. He has not only become a prominent figure in Indian cinema with films such as Masoom, one of my personal favorites, Mr. India, which I believe is Anushka's favorite, and Bandit Queen, but also in Western cinema with films such as the Oscar-winning Elizabeth and Elizabeth, the Golden Age. Without being hyperbolic, I can sincerely say that Shekhar is one of the most gifted storytellers we have. I admire this talent, not only because I get to watch the wonderful movies it results in, but also because as a neuroscientist, I know that much of what the brain does can be thought of as storytelling. The brain is always constructing narratives to organize our sensory inputs and to fill in missing pieces. The sense of an organized sensorium that all of us carry is really a construction. It's a story that the brain is telling itself. In dissecting the process of storytelling, we may very well understand the foundational processes of cognition. I'm delighted that we have Anushka Shah to engage Shekhar in conversation today. Anushka founded the Civic Entertainment Project at the MIT Media Lab and now runs a production house titled Civic Studios in Mumbai. Civic Studios creates entertainment in the form of films, web series, and short-form digital content to inspire citizen participation and help build better democracies. Anushka has a background in applied statistics and digital text analysis and has previously worked with nonprofits and political parties in India. She divides her time between India and the US, and she is currently joining us from South Bend, Indiana. Anushka and Shekhar's conversation will last for a little over half an hour, leaving about 20 minutes for questions from the audience. Anushka and Shekhar, thank you for allowing us to eavesdrop on your conversation. Over to you, Anushka.
Super, thank you so much. And thank you to MIT for organizing this. What a thrill to be in conversation with you, Shekhar, and on a topic as vast and wonderful as this. I'm, of course, a huge fan, and I'm going to aim to keep my childish excitement in control through this conversation. Just before this, we were talking about how when you learn something new, there's a connected dopamine to that. So I'm definitely looking forward to leaving this conversation happier, as I'm sure is our audience. So thank you to everyone who's joined this conversation. Imagination really is the bedrock of storytelling. Right? So the title of this talk is almost, to me, tautological. But between the lives we lead and the stories we tell about the lives we lead, there's this ocean of human revelation about our hopes and fears. And to me, that's what makes it fascinating to decode imagination and perception in storytelling. Shikhar, last time we spoke, you said everything we do is a story. As a way of maybe an introduction into this conversation, could you maybe unpack that for us a little and tell us how you think about, how we might perceive the world without storytelling?
So how about me doing the opposite thing? How about me telescoping it and not unpacking it? Because, so here's what I'm going to start with. I'm going to say imagination, storytelling, perception is the same thing.
Mm.
There would be no imagination without storytelling. Every time I look at something, absolutely, I look out of my window, I see a tree. I don't perceive a tree
Mm.
unless I can tell a story. Oh, that, look, I call it, it's a tree. It has branches. It's not an pure experience. It is an imagined experience. It is a story told experience, if you like. So everything that we look at, if we couldn't tell a story, we will not perceive it. So all perception is storytelling, and all perception is imagined, right? So the idea of imagination and storytelling and perception telescoped into one, it's the same thing. Everything that we look at, I can't understand it. So there it is, I can't understand it. I can't imagine it
Mm.
unless I have a story to tell. Now, is storytelling a confinement? Is it something that I am imprisoned in? That I cannot see anything unless I tell a story? In a way, yes. But the only person I can think of that actually could perceive something without telling a story is Buddha. It's when you go beyond storytelling, you come into what I call pure experience, not perceived experience. Pure experience is I am gazing, I am not seeing. There is an unprejudiced, unstory told gaze. That's the unraveling of this imagination. But there's no, what is imagination except storytelling? So when I look at Einstein's imagined the theory of relativity, right? Let me put it another way. Einstein imagined the story of relativity. You know what I mean?
Right.
It goes on. He told us a story of relativity. We turn it into what we call science. Particle physics is an imagined idea. Then you turn it into story. A particle leaves point A but gets to point B without getting, before it leaves point A. So therefore the particle B exists forever. Wherever you perceive particle B, it exists. What have I just done? I've just looked at the fundamentals of particle physics, but I've told you a story.
Mm.
What is the essential aspect of storytelling is linearity. I have just explained something completely non-linear, but I needed linearity to explain it. See, particle A didn't leave point A, but it got to point B before it left A.
Mm.
See the linearity between and linear connection between what I'm saying? These are imagined linear connections. But I needed a story. I needed linearity for my brain to comprehend it.
Right.
So we are conditioned to the linearity of storytelling.
Sorry, go ahead.
But go on, you go on.
The point you mentioned about Buddha between kind of pure, experiencing something in a pure way versus the perceived reality of it. That's interesting. Is there one that's more desirable between the two?
Well, I haven't perceived it, so I don't know. I mean, that's what we all say, right? Sit down, meditate, be in the now.
Hmm.
Just think about it, what we're saying. Be in the now. What does it mean? It means don't be in the future, don't be in the past, be here and now.
Hmm.
Effectively, what it's trying to say is forget about linearity. There is no future, there is no past. If you can, there is no future, there is no past, there is only the now. Therefore, there's no linearity. And if there's no linearity, there's no storytelling. And therefore, there's no perception. There is what we call pure experience,
Hmm.
unprejudiced, unprejudiced by story, unprejudiced by linearity, pure experience. I've never been able to do it. That's why I say Buddha, because which one of us is Buddha? I imagine that's what, when you say that, suddenly you get to be something, this Buddha is the idea that you can experience without being prejudiced by storytelling or imagination, if you like. You are beyond imagination. So you've gone beyond that.
What are the factors so then that go into that kind of, you used the word unprejudiced, right? So it sounds almost like being able to decode that story through perception has a various set of factors and maybe biases that play into that. What are the things at an individual level that you feel control how we perceive a story?
Unpredictability. That's really a very essential part. That's why we like stories. That's what, that's the human condition again. We keep running away from unpredictability, but every story we tell is unpredictable. And then if you look at the construction of a story, you start with something that happens and you cannot predict what happens. And that the more you unpredict it, the more unpredictable you make it, the more interesting and fascinating. That's why murder mysteries are called murder mysteries. The idea of mystery is an unpredictability. And the cleverer the mystery is written in, the more you're attracted to it. You're attracted to unpredictability. But of course, unfortunately, our mind is conditioned to end. We are conditioned to beginning and an end. I have no idea why, because time never began, so it could never end. Right? So, but because we have that, we suddenly have to give a resolution.
Right.
Now, what is a resolution in a story? A resolution is a predetermined need in us to resolve everything. But if it was completely resolved, it'd be boring.
Yeah.
Right? So the best resolutions are, part of it is resolved, part of it is still unresolved. And that's why some great stories end with everything be resolved, and suddenly some faces peeking around the corner and say, and then it goes on, because some non-resolutory idea should still emerge. Otherwise, it becomes dull.
Yeah. No, I think that's fascinating and links back to maybe, I think something Pawan was saying earlier as well about finding the sweet spot between predictability and unpredictability.
Yeah.
One thing that you often hear in the creative world from writers and filmmakers is this kind of articulation that this is a story I really want to tell, or I think this is really important for people to know. And given the role of individual perception, in digesting a story, how do you as a filmmaker control that the story you code is the story the audience decodes on their end? And is that even something as a filmmaker you can control?
So if you ask me two questions, this idea of a story I've always wanted to tell, what is that? That's your sense of morality. You have a moral point of view that drives you. Now, it doesn't have to be societal morality. It could be personal morality. It could be relationship morality. It could be conflict of the universe morality. They're all related, So what drives you is, I really want to tell you a story is how powerful your morality is, how deeply you feel about it. Do you feel anger? How emotive you are about it. That drives you. After that, it's your skill. After that, it's your skill as a storyteller to create the right things in your subconscious to the mind of the audience subconscious. Because in a way, it's related. In a way, so how do you then treat the subconscious of the audience and take them through using the very tools that you yourself perceive? So it's a journey inside that also becomes a journey outside towards the audience, because that's the only way you could judge. No great story can be told unless you feel the sense of movement and conflict and conflict and conflict after conflict within yourself. And then you hope that the audience feels it. Then after that, it's a skill. It's the same in every art. Let's say a singer, a great Indian classical singer. Ultimately, the greatest Indian classical singer will go into the rag, but the rag comes from inside. And somehow the emotive part of the rag provokes an emotive power within the listener. And so it's emotive power to emotive power. that you transfer. But if you didn't understand emotive power from point A to point B between you and the listener, if you didn't have that emotional quality inside you, or if you didn't open yourself, then you would be able to. So it's an act of opening yourself out, is
Right.
to transfer the story from one to the other. But it's a strange thing, Anushka, because um, all storytelling is conflict. All art is conflict, right? The poet is telling conflicting words. And out of that, the poet, a really good poet, is asking you to draw the meaning from it. That's a great point. A.R. Rahman is doing great music. All great compositions are conflicting notes. They're not in harmony. The only notes in harmony would be, but they're not. They're going up and down and up and down and up and down, constantly creating a sense of conflict. What are they really doing? Is they're forcing you to constantly find harmony. You are the creator of harmony. The composition is the creator of chaos, right? And by the time you found one harmony, it's changed again, and then it's changed again. Why am I saying this? Now look at a murder mystery. It's exactly what it's doing,
Yeah.
right?
Right. I'm trying to think of, how this the linearity that you're talking about in storytelling and the journey that a storyteller kind of takes you through that, constant conflict and unpredictability, so that you're kind of engaged in finding that harmony, like you said. How much, and this is just an extension of the previous question, how much does that linearity work again in the decoding at the audience's end, right? I think of a movie like it's one of my favorite examples to cite, but Wall Street, the original one. And in that, the filmmaker had a very explicit intent of almost social impact or social good morality, like you said, where he had spoken about how the idea was to call out the bad culture of greed on Wall Street. But he ended up creating a character that was romanticized that greed almost, and greed is good became the kind of gecko effect till date on Wall Street, and there are kind of impact studies proving that. And I always find that fascinating that he had a clear moral position. It was a great film, and yet kind of the predictability of the linearity of his message from what he intended to what was ultimately digested was on very different planes. So, what are some of the factors, whether it's cultural, whether it's a question of the time that film or cult media piece was released, that dictate this coding and decoding?
Well, moral is question of the fashion of the time. At that time, we still do, I hope. We believe that greed is bad. That's what a great story does, though. It puts you in a controversial conflict of morality. How does it do that? It'll create a character that is very greedy and make you admire. That's why we remember Star Wars by Darth Vader, not so much by Luke Skywalker. Why? Because there is an inner darkness in us. And the storyteller has made you admire, make that character mysterious, obsessive. You're obsessed by that, right? But sometimes the filmmaker goes overboard and you start falling in love with that character. That character is. But if somebody says Darth Vader today, they'll say, if they say Star Wars today, they'll say Darth Vader. That's the great image. And we all know that it's the dark force that attracts you. Maybe because we have this fantasy of indulging in dark forces and we believe we shouldn't. So what the filmmaker or the storyteller is doing is creating that conflict in you. You're more attracted to the dark forces. That's why vampire films we love. You're constantly attracted to dark forces because you believe in your moral sense you're not there. But you fear that you are because you're getting obsessed by it.
Yeah.
Right? And therefore, once you get to the end of the dark force, but the dark force will rise again. And so the story will go on. So it's very interesting. Godfather. It's another film everybody says. Look at the premise the Godfather used. Crime doesn't pay.
Right.
constantly films have, well, since the 30s, still say crime doesn't pay. What does it end with? The main character who said, I'm not going to join my family. I'm going to go and I'm going to become part of the, or the army, promising his wife, this is not my life. I just have to go to this wedding and I'm just going to come away. How does he end? Remember the last shot? His hand is being kissed. He's become his father.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
it starts with a premise that we all say crime doesn't pay, but in the end, crime pays. But what did he do? He overcame one moral issue with a very strong moral issue. I can tell you, if you take one scene out of Godfather, the whole film won't work. When his father is almost dying in hospital, and the other guy is standing there, his guard can't light a cigarette. The son comes and finds he can light a cigarette. So the morality of families must stick together comes into conflict. That's another morality we have. And
Right.
morality is often guilt. That's why in India, big family stories all do well because they come from the point where families were thrown apart. We used to be joint families, they were thrown apart, and we are all individuals looking for relationships. And the memory of joint families throws us back, the guilt of having left it. So,
Yeah.
therefore, all those. So, Godfather, crime doesn't pay, to crime does pay. Why? Because family, he has to stand up for his father. So, it puts you in a moral conflict as an audience. Do you want him to leave and let his father die? No, that's another morality. How can a man leave his father to die?
Yeah.
The father was also, the Godfather itself was creatively constructed. Remember, he said no to drugs.
Yeah.
So that's how you do it.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, I guess the most iconic films are the ones that have lasting legacies, are the ones that can kind of mirror or connect with the audience's moral conflicts, and ones that are often universal and timeless. Which brings me to and one of your many iconic films, Bandit Queen. It was, I remember watching it when I was younger, and it was such a kind of different way to understand the image of Phulan Devi that otherwise existed. When you were making that film, is there a certain moral conflict and through that a message or a morality that you had in mind that you wanted to communicate to the audience? And how did the reactions of the audience at the time, or what the film is remembered for today, correlate to what your intention had been?
So Bandit Queen was not pre-planned. The story, there was a script, but the way the film turned out wasn't planned. I didn't know how to make it. How do you make a film about somebody that was still alive who I'd never met, who they wouldn't allow me to meet, who was in prison at that time? Bandit Queen came across, it formed itself as I was filming, as art often does. As you look at a canvas and you start painting and the painting emerges, you don't have a plan. I remember, okay, let me say this one thing and then I'll go on to what I was just going to say. Ultimately, Bandit Queen became anger against myself.
Anger against yourself?
Yes.
Okay.
Because how far away did I live at that time? Did I not know the story of Bandit Queen, of Phulan Devi? Of course I did. But it's always on the third page somewhere in the newspaper. It never hit the front headlines. And it was ultimately understanding the politics of rape. Right? And I said, okay, we are responsible as men. I carry the burden of the villain. I am the villain. I am the villain. And I realized I am the villain because I didn't do anything about it. Right? And the moment that started happening for me, it was like I was expunging my guilt. And it was a film that turned, my own film turning against me as a man. So all those villains over there, that was me. That's why it was such a provocative film. That was me doing it because of my guilt of not having done anything.
Yeah.
Right? So it emerged. I remember Seema Biswas, who played Phulan Devi, came to me one day because I had made Mr. India and I was a known director. And she said, okay, let's go through the character arc and the graph of the character. And I didn't know. So what directors always do is say, well, why don't you think about it? So I said, go back and write 2 pages about Poolan Devi, so how you see the graph and the character. She came back and she wrote 2 pages. It was amazing. And I said, Seema, I've just realized what to do. You're wrong, right? What you do is go back, write 2 pages about yourself.
Mm.
And then she came back and said, how do I write 2 pages myself? I'm so many things. I can't confine myself to 2 pages. I said, then why do we think we can confine Poolan Devi to one film, to a script, to an idea? So they all the actors came and said, what do we do? I said, let's just make the film.
Mm.
If you think, let's go on a journey, the journey of trying to discover Poolan Devi and trying to discover why that story is important to tell. Obviously, it's important to tell because, these kind of stories, it is always one person's journey that defines the journey of a big social issue.
Yeah.
So Mandela's story talks not just about Mandela, it talks about apartheid.
Right.
So Poolan's story talks not just about Poolan Devi, but about the idea of what rape is. And ultimately, it proved to me that rape is not a sexual act. It's an act of domination, an act of humiliating somebody else to give yourself self-worth.
Mm.
So that's how we went in from scene to scene to scene. We all discovered ourselves in that film. All of us started to discover ourselves in that film. So it was a film that emerged.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's probably how some of the most powerful films are made, when the filmmaker, writer themselves go through the transformative journey.
Yeah.
I think the audience can kind of connect with that. Do you think the rape as an issue from when Bandit Queen was made and today in India has a lot more attention in the mainstream media, both entertainment and news? Do you feel like the way the politics of rape is handled in entertainment narratives has evolved to a better or worse place?
I think there's a greater question today about male and female, the idea of the dominance of male and female,
Hmm.
which Bandit Queen was released today, because there is a greater conversation and understanding and the assumption that male being the dominant idea within a male-female relationship, that's being questioned. And in that question would have come Bandit Queen, and people would have come out with an idea, a much larger idea than that. Because at that time, oh, she was raped. This basic question of what does it mean? This basic question of the conflict between the male and the female and the domination of the male was not such a big question at that time. That question, now we are really coming to terms with it. That it's not just about rape, it's about how do men feel about themselves? That's the question. Who do we think we are? That's the question.
Yeah. I just want to quickly interject from our conversation to just for the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave it in the Q&A. I think in about 10 minutes or so, we'll switch to audience questions. I'd love to be greedy and use all the time for my questions, but we'll switch to that in 10 minutes. With kind of thinking about rape and storytelling and the perception of how we see an issue like that, one of my research pieces as a graduate student had been on looking at how the Indian news talks about rape or spoke about rape before the Nirbhaya incident in 2012, right after, and 3 years after that. And we had used this kind of machine learning approach to code a vast set of news articles in the English press in India. And what we found is that, just before the rape happened, there was very little coverage on the issue, and it was treated as isolated incidences. Right after, it became a kind of story about outrage and anger and the dominance of men and the demand for a death penalty, which, has all kinds of dangers to that kind of narrative. And then 3 years later, it became much more about actually finding the thematic connected dots between these different incidences, and that those came down to not just an individual incident or the merits of that incident, but the gender biases, raising daughters and sons differently, unequal pay. And I found that fascinating that a story had emerged in the journalistic reporting of that. It's also created a lot of polarization in, I think, how we think about rape and discuss gender politics. And I wanted to kind of maybe switch a little into, stay within storytelling, but pivot a little into our neighborly space of journalism. Polarization and, fake news is as old as the hills in some ways. And so whether it's more heightened now because of social media and technology or otherwise, we're definitely more aware of the problem of polarization in media. How do you see the relationship between storytelling, perception, and polarization today?
Let's leave. We'll talk about that particular incident later, because that particular incident, as you say, has gone through various levels of perception, and we are now coming to the right perception. It's in the teaching, and the gender bias, is it imposed or is it normal, or born with it? And more we're saying we were not born with it. It is imposed upon our educational and our system. But let's come to the point that you talked about. I'm going to take a very controversial point of view there. I'm saying that journalism is storytelling. No journalism is not storytelling. Anything after the fact is an interpretation. It might be a good interpretation. It might be the right interpretation, but the right is a moral stand, which in itself, a moral stand is a story, right? So one man's revolutionary is another man's terrorist. Do you know what I mean? It's a story. So without coming to say right or wrong, anything after the fact, if you come out after this interview and I said, I talked to Shekhar Kapur, he said this, is your interpretation of what was said. My interpretation of what we spoke about right now, or anybody's listening, everybody's interpretation is going to be different.
Yeah.
Because the moment after the fact is an interpretation. So all journalism is interpretation. So fake news, right news, everything is an interpretation. But let me go even deeper than that. Perception is an interpretation. The way I'm looking at you is my interpretation of you. How factual is that? When everything all around us is our interpretation. So everything is illusory. But then we say, well, that's fine. How else do we lead our lives? We have to make something that is illusory, morally right. So we make something that is illusory, morally right, which is the right thing to do. Otherwise, how does civilization work? It cannot work without that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't take away from the fact that everything after the fact is a perception, an illusion, an interpretation. And I come down, well, how much of the fact in itself is not a story? How do you see it? What did you see? What did you perceive? And what did you see are the same thing. And the moment I say, what did you perceive? You're already telling a story based on a million experiences of your own.
Yeah. Is that what a good journalist should strive towards, to reduce the gaps between the in some sense the inevitable storytelling, like you said, and I don't know if pureness of a fact is a fictional term, but as much between a piece of data and the story around the piece of data?
The mind doesn't understand a piece of data. You can throw data at a mind, even the way you cut, say, news stories, the way CNN or all them, you cut them together, you're already telling a story. You're already interpreting it the way you cut it. You didn't cut to one child just sitting there listening to the bomb and going away and eating. You didn't. You've already decided how you're going to tell the story. But that doesn't mean that journalism has no value. It does. It is very important in our world to take moral stands. It's really important if our civilization has to live on moral grounds, even though morality is an interpretation. But we have to do it. We must do it. And therefore, a great journalist to me today, is one that interprets, but interprets with a strong moral conviction. But it is still an interpretation.
Right.
If I go out today and take a photograph, why did I frame it like that? That frame in itself is an interpretation. I'm saying, hey, I photographed, I saw it, but you framed it.
Yeah.
That itself is an interpretation.
Right.
Of that moment of yours.
when thinking about perception and interpretation and the question of, I think augmented reality and virtual reality in innovation media is important, least of all because, we're at MIT having this conversation. But it's been one of the key innovations in media and technology, right? And that form of immersive storytelling has such a power on what you perceive. And I almost feel like it reduces your ability to perceive on your own. A little bit, I think, like the difference in, reading a book and watching a movie. When I'm reading a book, I'm playing out, creating the look of the characters and the set and the locations based on some of the words, but based a lot of on my interpretation of it. While a movie is one step further in that, where it's already kind of painting that picture for me. And then when it comes to VR experiences, you're completely submitted, to that medium in some sense. How do you kind of see the role of AR and VR in kind of media and storytelling today?
So let me blow one myth, Anushka. Right? Reading in itself, book is giving into technology. Before the Gutenberg press, there was no books. So you already enslaved yourself by technology. But what you've done is read the book and interpreted it in a different way. Before the Gutenberg press, all stories were told. Right? Listening to a story, reading a story, going into VR and experiencing a story are all experiences.
Right.
When give a child a crayon and they'll start to draw. They're interpreting the universe, right? Now you give a child an iPad and they'll start to draw.
Right.
You're effectively using different tools, okay? So let's understand at every stage, your interpretation comes to play. But it's a very interesting question you've asked because that's what I'm exploring now, is immersive experiences. Are immersive experiences taking away from your ability to interpret and imagine and recreate? I don't think so. I think immersive experiences are nothing but immersive, right? Just as walk into a film, a great film. If I see Space Odyssey 2001, it's a much more immersive experience than I'm thinking about it or somebody's telling me the story. Yet at the end of it, I'm asking even more questions than I would have if I had seen the movie, which is a technological experience. So my hope and my desire really is that what immersive storytelling will do is push you to question further. Isn't it? That's about what storytelling is about. That's what it's about, right? To push questions further, to engulf you. And so your questions become even more relevant and more relevant. In fact, I've not succeeded. I don't think I ever will. But when I started to think about immersive experiences, VR, AR, I actually went to a company in the US and said, let's develop a game, immersive game with a story engine, a game engine within a story, a VR, and see if we can get people to question the same things that Buddha questioned. And one by one, drop each question. And then you come to this whole close to the nirvana experience because you asked all the questions, you experienced that was wrong, that was wrong, that was wrong, that was wrong. And it's an immersive experience.
Yeah.
Now we know that a lot of these apps, I mean, quite ancient apps now are giving you the experience of meditation. But so every technology gives you a sense, but your perception, your imagination never leaves. And my hope is that the way we use VR and AR will provoke it even further to explore even further. Right? But on the other hand, is there anything they can take away from walking barefoot in the forest with no thought at all except the experience? No. But then you're not reading a story either, at that.
Well, let's hope whether it's walking through a forest barefoot or VR, we're all moving towards storytelling that's enlightening. Thanks so much for answering my questions. I think, like I said at the start, the unpredictability in hearing your thoughts is fantastic. It's every answer has something new to it. I will switch to some of the questions that we've been getting from the audience. I think Noreen has been kind enough to combine some of the ones that are similar. So thank you to everyone in the audience who's been sending them. So I think the first question she's put together is, we as humans love unpredictability and storytelling. Why then does it not translate in real life? Many humans run away from unpredictability, or humans run away from humans who embrace unpredictability.
I think that's an illusion. I think we try and counter unpredictability because there is a certain fear of unpredictability, of
Hmm.
what's going to happen next. But honestly, if there was no unpredictability, we would not fall in love. Love only exists because it's unpredictable. Passion only exists because it's unpredictable.
Hmm.
Innovation only exists because it's unpredictable. The
Hmm.
day you wake up in the morning and go out only exists because it's unpredictable. What you
Hmm.
do during the day, you do only because it's unpredictable. Now, the question really is, why do we fight it all the time? Why can't we embrace it? Because we are afraid of death. We are afraid of the inevitability of death. We are afraid of the unpredictability of life. We are afraid. So we constantly come and sit in the same chair. Look, this is my chair. My armchair. Look, this is my desk. So we
Yeah.
constantly countering unpredictability with whatever we can make predictable. But I would hazard a guess. I would say that if everything was completely predictable, we would die. Why would we even born?
Boredom, yeah.
Yeah. There's unpredictable is the very essence of art, essence of innovation, essence of life, essence of love, essence of passion. And if you take all of those things out, then why do we exist?
Hmm. So you think, I mean, just to, I guess, bases the question. So we run away from unpredictability because the fear of something going wrong or death, like you said.
Yeah, the unpredictable also scares us, which
Hmm.
is what is, but which is also what drives us. You climb a mountain. You wouldn't climb a mountain or go on an expedition if you didn't think you would die. But it also drives you. So
Right.
predictability is a great driving factor, both ways.
Yeah.
The desire for it and the fear of it. And so we constantly try and take away the fear by being comfortable, by being habitual, by being a lot of things. But at the same time, it's not driving you. The
Yeah.
fear of it is driving you. So yeah, it's the driving force of being born is unpredictability.
It's a good way to think about kind of your daily trials and tribulations around wanting a regular routine and wanting something different.
I know. Like, but when you think about it, so many events in our lives must have told us. That's why I can tell you I have no life insurance. Because when the guy came to me and had been trying to sell me life insurance, I said, hang on. I am betting that I will die, and you're betting that I won't. I said, that's
Yeah.
the essence of life insurance, right? He said, yes. I said, well, why would I pay you money to bet that I will die? I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So there is, and every now and again, our structures around us collapse. And we are saying, oh my God. But we've never actually confronted the fact that those structures were illusory.
Hmm.
We know, like, this is what the virus has told us. All
Hmm.
structures are illusory.
Yeah.
This 2008 showed us all our structures are illusory.
Hmm.
So we keep building up constant illusions of existing structures when there are actually no structure is not illusory. Over time, it's just a matter of, okay, they're illusory over 10 years, over 1 year, over 15, 20 years, but they are illusory.
The rest of my day is going to be spent in an existential crisis.
Right, right.
There's another question that we have, which is super interesting. I'd love to hear the answer as well. What's the one story that you've always wanted to tell in a video format but haven't been able to as yet? Is there any story that you wanted to tell but haven't found the right way to do it? And where this is these questions are combined from various people who are asking similar ones. So
There is no one story. I have been wanting to make the film Pani for a long time about the future of water, but it's not just about water, it's about power.
hmm.
It's the story of, in the future, what will happen when the world gets divided between those that have and those that don't. And water becomes the one control of water becomes how you control economically and financially and socially people. You
Hmm.
know, so it's a world where you still have democracy, and but you say you give us your vote, we'll give you water. And the problem is that's what democracy is today.
Yeah.
You know, it's a negotiation. It's not like, oh, we're a democratic nation.
Yeah.
Democracy is a negotiation between two ideas, two needs.
Yeah.
The politicians need votes, and we need water, is what I'm saying. Water becomes the metaphor. So I've been wanting to make that, but I want to make it with a producer that understands. And I think I'm now negotiating OTT. But remember this: there is no singular story.
Hmm.
Every story that I've ever told has 25, 100 multiple stories within it,
Hmm.
right? There's no
Hmm.
singular idea. So even if you look at Ballet Queen or Elizabeth or Mr. India or Masoom, there's multiple storytelling going on. There's multiple characters, multiple ideas, constantly exploding out of the story.
Yeah.
There's no one story.
Hmm. Well, I think the multiple stories that might exist under the water conflict, I
Yeah,
think,
yeah, there are the ideas of
yeah,
myth. Yeah,
yeah, we hope that,
yeah, yeah. There's multiple stories in there.
yeah. Another question we have, which is the media industry has too much power and influence at the direct mindset of people. How is it kept in check besides the censor board, especially with the existence of political pressure and influence?
Um, what the media industry is something that's completely fluid. You know, it's not a. It changes every day. You know, it's like an ocean. You know, there is a crest of something, and then there's a wave, or there's a trough of resistance that takes over. So if you really look at the way it goes up and down and up and down. Should there be a censor board? I wish there was no reason for it there to be a censor board.
Hmm.
I am a great believer. When I first started on social media, I still believe really that, you know, the wisdom of the crowd might win. But the
Hmm.
wisdom of the crowd has been overtaken by very, very large institutions. So
Hmm.
here, I think Facebook should be disbanded. I think
Hmm.
the big corporations that actually are the big platforms, what it has done has created large platforms. And in to really understand the wisdom of the crowd, it should be distributed into fragmented platforms, completely
Hmm.
fragmented. So not everybody's on Twitter, not everybody's on Facebook, not
Hmm.
everybody's on Instagram. You
Right.
start fragmenting it, and this fear of social media will go away.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I guess somewhere that's, a little bit even with OTT platforms, you kind of started out with Netflix being the leader in that, and you now have, 10, 12 different platforms globally that which I think has fragmented that storytelling more. And I guess similar to the history of newspapers as well. So yeah, you're right. That's probably the way for it to go.
You know, and here's what happens is that the great thing is technology. Technology is the great disruptor. Uh, Blockbuster destroyed Hollywood. Came, you know,
Hmm.
came, Netflix came and destroyed Blockbuster. Now
Hmm.
I'm waiting for the next technology to destroy Netflix, because here's what happens: is that every new technology creates a disruptor that everybody gets very excited about, and then that disruptor itself becomes the gatekeeper. And the
Yeah.
moment they become the gatekeeper, it's waiting for a technology to come to disrupt it. If you just talk to, I can tell you right now that if you go, when Doordarshan in India used to be the thing, अरे यार चलो दूरदर्शन से apply करते हैं. You know, there was a word like as if you're going applying for something. Apply.
Hmm.
Let's apply to Doordarshan. They're using the same words for Netflix. Let's
Yeah.
apply to Netflix. So
Yeah.
they become the great gatekeepers now. The same arrogance has gone there,
Yeah.
right? Now, then, so you need, it doesn't take very long. Today, technological innovation is so high, and so disruptive. They just find themselves crumbling very soon.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what user-generated content does a lot as well, right? I think with putting technology in the hands of creators. I mean, something like TikTok, it really takes you to it removes in some sense so many layers of production between the viewer and the content creator. There's of course other layers that creep in, but it's fascinating to see the difference between high production content and something like TikTok, in which the gatekeepers are far fewer.
Yeah.
There's a question linked, I think.
TikTok was what, a $70 billion company before most of the world knew there was something called TikTok around, because the young generation picked it up, and the world is controlled by older people. And they didn't even realize there was something called TikTok. Then suddenly, hang on, it's worth 70 billion. Everybody jumped into it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think like you said, with innovation, the definition probably is that to create something new, you have to destroy something old. And I think, one of the questions that's interesting linked to the pandemic is, the question is, what do you feel is the future of storytelling? And has the pandemic impacted your stories and the way you craft them? And in what ways?
I think what the pandemic has done is reinforced a moral point of view of the unfairness of the world. I just told you the idea behind Pani. And Pani water was about two cities. One that has water, it's like Gaza and Israel, one has water, one doesn't. And in between that is one is protected. You can't cross from one to the other without getting killed.
Yeah.
We're heading in the pandemic, we're heading that. We're heading towards a world divided by vaccinations.
Yeah.
You can see it unfolding in front of ourselves. There are two cities, really. Within India, there are two cities. There are two things: those that can get vaccinated and those that can't.
Yeah.
Water. Those that have water, those that can't.
Yeah.
So it really should drive, certainly for me, I was very concerned about the unfairness of how we live ourselves, about the fact that, 3% of the population of the world consumes 20% of the planet's wealth.
Yeah.
Something is inherently wrong in our business systems, Anushka.
Yeah.
I can remember when in 2008, when the great crash happened, I remember President Obama was talking about, at one forum, he was talking about how the resources of the planet and how we must preserve the planet. The very next day, he said, the only way to get out of this recession is to go and consume more. Do you remember?
I don't remember the statement, but
there was, and nobody saw any contradiction in that. There's an essential problem in our economic systems, because what we don't know, what we've forgotten is that because economic growth and GDP have become the mantras. What we've forgotten is simple living. Because the economy cannot be driven, your GDP cannot be grown. People, within a pandemic, just look at the number of billionaires that have come up. Look at Elon Musk's value within the pandemic. Look at India. Look at the number of billion-dollar companies that are coming within the pandemic. So what does that mean? What does $120 billion or $1 trillion mean? It means nothing. What it means is that we are aspiring to the wrong thing. We've forgotten that we can walk the forest barefoot and be imaginative and be creative and be simple and love. I'm sorry getting to that, but we've forgotten that. We've forgotten that. So our economic systems are built on, on getting rich. What does that mean? And then what happens is then suddenly we realize, oh my God, global warming. What is global warming? A lot of it caused by overconsumption. Oh my God, overconsumption. But how will we grow without overconsumption? So there's a fundamental problem here in globalization.
Yeah. And you feel the pandemic is going to maybe, from as a storytelling point of view, maybe
the most relevant story to tell right now is how do we live simpler lives? And we've started to describe scarcity as poverty. There's two different things. Scarcity, of that. Okay, so something is scarce. I can't buy a car. Cars are scarce. Hang on, that's not poverty. Or water, for example. That's why I picked water. Water was supposed to be a community resource. Right? You went to the local well or the local pond to get water. Now, because it comes in my taps, I say, oh no, it's mine. How did water ever become yours? Because it comes in your tap? Maybe that's wrong. Maybe it shouldn't come in your taps. Maybe you still have to go out and just get a bucket and bring water home. That's what we've lost.
Mm.
But 90% of the world lives, you have to travel, walk 12 kilometers to get water sometime. But the rest of the world says, well, water is a problem. No, you get in my tap.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No.
yeah, the virus has pushed that idea. So for me, that's a huge thing that we need to keep making films and stories about.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. I think it's kind of the question whose time has really come to kind of explore. Shekhar, we're going to take, I think, one last question in the couple of minutes we have left. So I think the last one is, stories can be subjective, perceived in many different ways. How do you balance the extremes?
You don't. Stories must be perceived in many ways. How can I do that? Actually, the more ways the audience perceives in a different person perceives in a different way based on their own lives. That's a story. What does it do? What is it? Imagine a story as a symphony, right? You're sitting there listening to Mozart's symphony. Everybody's going to perceive it differently based on their emotion of that moment and of their life experience. And that's what all good stories should do. Must do that. Now, the question is, will they be experienced in extreme ways so that it causes extremism? Is maybe, if that is the question, then you, as a storyteller, have the responsibility not to do that. And yet, the most read book in Hinduism is Gita. And, Krishna's lecture to Arjun says, "You are not responsible for death. You are only responsible to fire the arrow." But then you have to be able to interpret it to what is it really telling you. If you just said that and left it, you're not telling the real story about what Gita is about. For example, I'm just taking one example.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I guess there isn't necessarily need to balance it. It's about kind of finding the conflict and the...
Yeah, you need to tell your story in a way because you need to understand it. So you can't. In this world, you can't provoke us. You are responsible as artists about it.
Right. Shekhar, thank you so much. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, left with a lot of new thoughts, a lot of existentialism as well to go back and think about. I think, but particularly, I think the last point that you mentioned about, the question whose time has come because of the pandemic. I think in many parts of the world, we really still are in the heart of the pandemic. I think gratefully in other parts, we're starting to see the glimmer of a post-pandemic life. And I think there's a lot of, even as an audience member, there's a lot of, I think, self-consciousness around how we decode or perceive stories, and that it isn't as passive an experience as I think we might sometimes assume it to be. So this was fascinating. Thank you so much again to MIT for organizing, and it's been lovely.
Thank you, Anushka. Thank you, MIT. Thanks everybody for attending. It's been fun. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Super. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.